Okay, moving on to our what's the tea. I'm dead at this imagery though, like bad karma. I want to start off by saying that all karma is just karma. And I'm saying this as a big, like, all karma is just karma. Good and bad are adjectives that inform us in a way, like on a certain level. But ultimately, because karma is just simply action. That's the meaning of it. The meaning of the word karma is action, and from Sanskrit, action. So when we think of like what determines like good karma and what determines bad karma, I mean it's the same debate as to like what is good or bad, or is there good or bad. It's based off of societal judgment or what we've collectively decided, or not the personal we, but the royal we, so to speak. What was already decided way before we came into the world and could even talk and have comprehension of what the fuck the concept of life is, So I don't know. I wanted to acknowledge that macro sense because in I'm saying like super macro, like most general terms. Like, what are our definitions, right? Because yes, there is, like, in the most practical terms, when we're dealing with like everyday life situations, there are actions that are preferred to be taken over other actions. You get what I'm saying? And based off of that preference, that royal we preference, that royal we didn't ask me preference, that's how we get to that determination of like what is a good cause or a bad cause, what is a good effect or a bad effect. Now, I think for those who don't practice Buddhism, I think there's a misperception that like once there's something bad, like a bad cause or a bad effect, like once things just start getting bad, that's just how it is. That's how it is forever. Like there's not a lot of hope for transformation. And I think a lot of people, we start to see a lot of people in a more distorted lens when we don't make room for the possibility of transformation because we when we don't make room for like things like redemption or like clearing up misunderstandings, even because not everything is necessarily about like, oh, I have to redeem myself. Sometimes people think the worst of you, but they got it fucked up. You get what I'm saying? So what I'm trying to get at is that you can always transform things that are thought of as bad karma into amazingly stellar karma, great karma. You get what I'm saying? That's the real beauty of karma when one practices Buddhism, is to have that awareness. That it's particularly within Mahayana Buddhism, more specifically within Nichiren Buddhism, because it is based off of the Lotus Sutra. The Lotus Sutra, well, let's be clear, because I am going to give it a whole history lesson. I don't give a fuck. Since we got this card. I'm going to be quick with it, though. So the historical Buddha is thought to have first obtained enlightenment by sitting under the Bodhi tree. Like, that's what we think of when he was in ancient, which is really Nepal. People just assume it's India, but he was technically a part of Nepal, what is modern day Nepal. Known as a prince, went out to the world, saw suffering, and trying to figure out like, okay, how do we make suffering like not a thing, right? And so he's thought of as sitting under this tree, meditating, realizing that he was an enlightened person from that specific form. But as he spent the subsequent decades of his life teaching the concepts of Buddhism and expounding it. Now, number one, this happened in a time prehistoric to like having written texts. So much like in Africa, where there was like a griot, people would receive these teachings orally and would have to repeat it over and over and over again in order to, have it, and it memorized by heart. And then they would, do that cycle so that it wouldn't be lost if somebody died or somebody, just fucked off. You get what I'm saying? Like, so as he was teaching this, he first was like, oh, I first obtained enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. But the reality of, at the pinnacle of his teaching, he shared that I have been a Buddha since time without beginning. That was his realization, his true realization. But the reason why he didn't first say that, when he first started, sharing this philosophy with others, was because sign of the times, people weren't ready. If you know anything about India, historic India and also contemporary India, you know that there's a caste system in place. So basically, whatever caste you're born into, it's often thought of that you have to, be born. You have to be born and die over many lifetimes in order to come out of that caste, to escalate the caste system, so to speak. So, like the people weren't fucking ready. But eventually, before his passing, he was able to expound like the ultimate law of the teaching, which is, the Lotus Sutra, that he attained. Number one, he attained Buddhahood many lifetimes ago. He attained enlightenment many lifetimes ago. And that too, that everyone has the potential to tap into their innate Buddhahood without exception, meaning that women, who were often thought of as unable to be enlightened, could definitely be Buddhists. The beetle down the street, hiding under the tree, Buddha. The Rock, Buddha. Now, I'm not talking about Dwayne Johnson. I'm talking about like an actual, like, rock. You get what I'm saying? So, Buddha. Evil people, Buddhas. Like, everyone has the power to transform their negative karma into positive karma. So when I want to look at this again, now that I've said all this, right? What is bad karma? When we have a need to acknowledge our heartbreak and disappointment, whether it's something that we're on the receiving end of or something that we're dishing out. So, like, beware of the causes that you make and what their impact is on the people you're invoking your causes on and on yourself. Some people don't realize the causes that they make can really and unnecessarily like mess with somebody's life. I'm not talking about like life as they know it. So I'm not talking about like livelihood or reputation, image, things of that nature. I'm talking about like their actual life. Sometimes the things you do can put someone's life at risk. And I think that's ultimately like the most negative calls you can make is to, put somebody's life at risk. But even that can be transformed. Like, if you actually cause someone to lose their life, directly or indirectly, for example, like, can that be transformed? Yes. Will it take a lot of time? Yes. Will you have the consequences to deal with? Yes. Like, and I'm using the most extreme example because I want to convey the power of like being able to transform anything without exception. Like that was the Buddhist belief, and that got obscured over the years of like as Buddhism expanded and was you know, was exposed to from Nepal, India, to China, to Japan, to the West. And there's one more quip that I'll cycle about Buddhism like toward the end. But as Buddhism expanded, this concept got lost again because a lot of cultural norms are patriarchal. And, you know, like, patriarchy likes to distort shit, you know, period. Like, it just does. It's gonna be like, okay, so how can we make the man at you know, the top of the food chain and everything that we do? So you know, within Nichiren Buddhism, from the 13th century sage Nichiren, who studied all the Buddhist teachings and like basically was able to confirm like, okay, no, this is what the Buddha meant when he was talking about this is how Buddhism is to be approached. This philosophy is to be approached. He was able to clarify, okay, no, everyone without exception has the potential for Buddhahood. So even when you are making negative causes, you have a relationship with the mystic law of cause and effect. So even your negative causes that create negative effects can later on bring you to a more positive outcome if you don't avoid it. If you acknowledge the pain, right? I'm sorry if this is like, this whole lesson is not the most, you know, I don't know. I like learning, and I like to share what I have learned, you know, over the course of my life. So I think it's just like, I take it seriously. I don't want to just say like, oh, avoid bad karma, avoid doing shitty things. I mean, yeah, that's what the fuck you're supposed to do. You're supposed to avoid doing shitty things. You're supposed to avoid being a shitty person. Like, duh. But it's not enough for me to just simply say that and then like move on. Like, we have to really break down in like what karma is and what good and bad karma is. Like, even your bad karma can lead you to a positive outcome if you are accepting of, you know, the effects based off the causes that you made. And then also to able to have the capacities to be like, okay, I don't want to live my life like that. I don't want to, like, that's the best way to not have bad karma. Ideally, is to simply, like, not live your life a certain way that is going to make you susceptible to that. But then the next best way is just learning from your mistakes, learning from, you know, the actions that were taken that were perhaps, like, not the best actions, and being radically accepting of it. Surrendering, you know, there is an element of surrender when you are at a crossroads, you know. But ultimately, when one is able to do all those things, then you're able to ask yourself, okay, what is value creating? How can I create value from my life? You know, that's ultimately the question. Because I am so tickled that this shit came back around 3 days in a row. So let's analyze this from a different perspective. I think we kind of went over the limelight aspect of it, but let's go over the audience aspect of a spotlight, because that's the whole point of a spotlight, is for the audience to kind of direct their attention somewhere, right? Spirit is saying that there is a stalking element to this limelight, like stand. Sometimes we have stands. How do you deal with that in this day and age? That requires creative solutions. That requires us using our Mercury and Neptune trine transit right now. Like, how do we deal with like the fact that we each have an audience?